this will have to be a separate film because I'm already uploading the last one. But of course I couldn't leave this just sitting without trying to figure out some of the basics of it at least. I've looked it up, I've googled it, and I think the ASM was a pre-war generator type engine. Coventry Climax, there's something in their history to do with Swift motors as well. It may have been an engine that came from there. It's a little bit hard to find much information on them. I found one YouTube film from about 10 years ago showing one running. I did leave a comment there. I wonder if the person still knows anything about them. But yeah, it seems a bit tricky at the moment to find information on them. I've found some, I think they're pre-war advertisements for this kind of engine, but goodness knows if I can get a manual or anything like that. Of course, Coventry Climax, it's a hard thing to search for because they made engines for quite a long time, starting with pretty simple side valve engines like this, I guess, through water pump type engines, fire pump engines, all the way up to formula type engines later on. So when you search for Coventry Climax, you get an awful lot of information, none of it relevant to this, which is a bit annoying. But it's a early or pre-war or early war side valve engine. It can't be that complicated, surely. So I've pulled the spark plugs out, and turning it over by hand, there is compression on each of the cylinders. I don't know if it's good compression, but there is compression. These are old spark plugs, made in England. Funny sort of tip design. Actually, I think this is a bit like, so this must be an early design, but I think this came back. I think you can get modern plugs that look similar to that now. So it's got compression, that's good. I don't know if you could measure the compression very easily. There's no electric starter on this, it's hand cranked. So I don't know if a compression gauge will give you a very good reading, because I'm not sure you'd be able to turn it over fast enough. But that's a good start. There's obviously the valves and the pistons are working. I do like how on the cylinder head it actually says cylinder number 1, cylinder number 2, and so on. I used a magnet on a stick to extract this. So this is the drive gear, and obviously somebody's made this, I guess, because that looks like a zinc galvanized bolt that they've used. But this has a sort of half drive dog thing that's looks like it engages down on there. I don't know if we'll be able to see that. Maybe. Not sure. So that's what drives the magneto or the distributor. Just notice that's actually cracked there. I don't know if that's a problem. So that engages with that gear down there, and this little eccentric is what drives the fuel pump. So again, maybe you can see there's a little pin that sticks out the side there. So that runs on that eccentric bush, and that's what drives the fuel. So that does engage down in there, I think. I'm not sure that's actually engaged properly. So there should be a way to get that, if I have a look at that thing, get that to engage with the distributor somehow. Unless I can get the right sort of magneto for it. I do have a magneto, but I don't know what it's off. I don't think it's the right sort. It's far too big. Yeah, it's not going to be that. The other problem with magnetos is they lose their magnetism over time, so any old magneto is probably going to be needing a rebuild, and that's reasonably expensive. I do know someone who can do it. They did my Riley one, but if there's a cheaper way to get this going, I'd rather do that. And that's kind of all I've discovered at the moment. This was rubbing before, when I picked the engine up, the fan was rubbing on the radiator a little bit, so there's a little bit of flex in something. It was interesting getting it here. Luckily I drove to the swap meet in the Land Rover and not the MGB, otherwise of course I couldn't have picked it up. But it took 3 of us to lift it into the back of the Landy, and that was a little bit tricky. I think I mentioned it's a little bit too tall to fit through the door, so we had to tip it over a bit to get this to clear. But that was fine. I strapped it down as best I could. It didn't fall over when I was driving. That was good. And then luckily, when I got home, I was trying to think, how the hell am I going to get this out? Because I'm sort of by myself this weekend as well. There's no one else here. And luckily my neighbour happened to go past right then, so I sort of waved him down, and he's a farmer, so we were looking at it, we were thinking, oh, can we use the ramps and, you know, roll it down the ramps? And then he said, oh, actually I'll get my tractor, which has got the bucket on the front. And we were able to bring the tractor in, lift the bucket up so it was level with the back of the Landy, roll this onto it, and then we basically strapped it to the bucket, and I stayed on the bucket, and we just backed it out and lowered it down really slowly. That was no problem. It's very handy living next door to a farmer with a tractor. So yeah, I think all I can do is try and find a bit of information about them, you know, see if I can find anything out about them. And I guess it's probably worth, is it better to strip it all down first and clean it up and put it back together and then try getting it running? Or is it better to see if it'll run as it is, if I can cobble up a distributor for it? Distributor and a coil. Don't know. I'm not sure what's happening with the throttle either. It looks like that should do something. There is a... Ah, I see. I think the throttle is stuck. I think that's what this is. There's an arm there. I think that must be the actual throttle butterfly. There's a spring here, and that's what that thing is to put some tension on it. And that little pin rides up against that. But this is just blocked up. I'd say the throttle butterfly in there is stuck. So I think it's probably going to need taking apart and cleaning. Not sure what sort of carburetor this is. Maybe it might be a Zenith, I think. Hopefully I can sort of take that apart and clean it up. This looks like it would need a good clean. So muffler seems good. It's got a threaded output on it, so I guess you would pipe that away somewhere. The overflow tube, this is broken, the solder's broken. I think it's meant to go into those clips. That's just been battered around over the years, I imagine. That should be easy to fix. And I think I'd prefer it on a different sort of stand. Don't know what these wheels are. They seem to be solid metal wheels. But, yeah, try not to get too distracted. This is all the original paint and stuff as well. So I would leave it like that. I wouldn't want to paint it. Just looking at it. Not sure if that's the original stand. No, it must be. This does bolt on. I've put some penetrating oil on things. I move a bit more freely now. I do like these little levers. You can't even buy these little ball end things for less than I paid for this engine. So even just those make it worth what I paid. I think I mentioned it was, he had $100 on it. I offered him 80. He said, yep. $80 is about 40 pounds. I think I mentioned that. Neat. Yeah, I think it would be good to have a... I think that fuel tank would be fine. I think that needs repainting to match, rather than being a bright green like that. I'm not sure. Oh, it's the filter. I don't know if that's meant to be a bulb that you can pump. I don't think so. If it is, it's completely solid, so probably not. Goes there. That's the fuel line. I'd have to check if the fuel pump diaphragm is good. Oil pressure line. Like I say, I think I'm going to steal that gauge and use that on the Riley. I think that's a much nicer gauge than the one I've got on there, and I can put this one on that engine. They're both Eureka gauges, both the same brand. Yeah, like I say, try not to get distracted. I've knocked the pin out of the distributor drive, the one I got from the swap meet. I think it was $5 for this, and I've taken it apart. It seems pretty good. There's not much wear on it. It's got the advanced springs there. So I've just taken it apart. I'm gonna clean it up, but I think this will work pretty well in here. These things are all fairly standard anyway, but this fits in there. Sits down on top of that other little shaft. So I think all I need to do, if I can find my magnet on a stick again. Here it is. Whoops. This place is getting messy again, so I might need to clean up. I did actually do some Riley stuff. I turned the petrol tank over and sprayed the other end of the tank. So I'm going to leave it for a week or so, and I will sand down the runs and touch up the paint where those are. But that should look pretty good. If we extract this out again. Of course, now it's stuck. Well, it did come out once. It's not engaged, that's why. I wonder if it's on the oil pump. There we go. So I think all I need to do is, where's the distributor? Either join these two together, or probably what will be better is, this is the original part, I'm sure. If I take this pin out, I can machine up a new shaft similar to this that'll fit on there, be pinned through, and come down and be pinned through on there. That's probably a better way to do it. But those are going to be the same diameter. That's obviously 1/2 inch. Yeah, I think that would work quite well. I just need to machine up a little piece that joins between them, really. And to do that, I can use some of my, 4140 high tensile steel bar. This is what I'm going to make the pegs for to hold the guard stays for the Riley on, so I've already got that out. I think all I need to do is, I'll probably draw this up in CAD so I know what I'm making. This dimension here isn't super critical because you've got, you know, sort of this much play in the, well, not play, but movement in the distributor. So, you know, where it sits isn't critical. So that's pretty neat. I figured out this is actually a little oiler. It's quite neat. It's knurled, a little knurled collar that opens up the little oil hole there, and you can just turn it around. Given that this engine has the oil breather there, I don't think oiling it would be much of a problem. Any oil that goes down is going to go down into there, and it goes back through into the intake. Yeah. It'd be interesting to know if the oil pump is working. The fuel pump, rather. Could probably tell if I crack one of these off. Chances are there's some sort of diaphragm or something in there that may be dead. Who knows? The other thing I should do is put some penetrating oil on the radiator drain and see if there's any fluid in it. I'm pretty sure there isn't. There's nothing in the fuel tank. It's definitely got oil though. Looks like very clean oil as well. So I think that's going to be the way to do that. Where these pins have been, you can see it's sort of been peened over on both ends. So what I'll need to do is I'll probably chuck this up in the lathe or something and just machine that down to get the end off, or you can on this one I just touched on the grinder just to touch up the end to get the end round so it'll go through the hole. And this being a DK4, I may actually be able to get the parts for it locally even. So I need a new points, new cap, new rotor of course, plug leads. I'm sure I can get all of those things fairly cheaply. It might end up being a relatively cheap little project. And I think I already mentioned if I get it running, I want it to be mechanically good, but I'll clean it, but I'm not going to repaint it or anything. I'd rather leave it how it is. So I'll just give it a clean up, get the rust off it and oil it down, I suppose. Probably oils itself down when it's running. Guess I'm going to do this little Coventry Climax engine as a separate thing. I'll try and keep it separate from the Riley stuff. And I need to really not get distracted on it too much. So I'm going to do a little bit today. I might actually degrease it and pressure wash it. I'll block all the bits and pieces so nothing gets into there. I've been doing a little bit more research on it, and this is definitely an ASM engine. As far as I can tell, the story is that Coventry Climax were building these engines for a car company called Swift in 1930. There was a car called a Swift Cadet, and it's an 850cc inline 4. Obviously there's 4 spark plugs. So these engines were built for those cars. They only made, I think it was 250 of those cars in 1930, and then the Swift company went bust. So Coventry Climax had a whole bunch of these engines left over, and they turned them into generator engines, which is what this is. And that's all I've really been able to find out about them. I might send a message to the Swift Car Club. There is one in the UK. Maybe they know a little bit more about the engines. But really there isn't a lot of information. Of course, Coventry Climax went on to build other engines, so it's really hard to get information about these early ones. They went on to make the fire pump engines, which were very lightweight, very powerful engines for their size. And then from there it grew into the race car type engines. But this is, I guess, one of their earlier efforts. that's basically all I've been able to find out about it so far. But I have been playing around with how I'm going to do the ignition system on it. Originally it would have had a magneto, but one of them is going to be really hard to find, and even if I can find one, it's probably going to need rebuilding. So instead I got that distributor, and that was a DK4. It's an Austin 7 distributor. It's a common distributor. It's used on a whole bunch of cars of the 30s. I went through all my Austin 7 parts to see if I had spare bits and pieces. I did have another one of these, but it was all broken. So I've got a rotor cap, but that's broken. I don't have the right rotor arm because this one needs to go anti-clockwise, I think. I need to put it back together and have a look again. But I have cleaned up what I've got. So I put this through the ultrasonic cleaner. I really need to get a different sort of solution for that. The stuff I'm using doesn't seem very good. In the end, I just redid it with soapy water and a little bit of ammonia. Floor cleaner, basically. But it's cleaned up pretty well. I took the points off. Well, I stripped the whole thing down, basically. But I took the points off and gave them a bit of a go with some paper just to clean them up. I was going to test the capacitor, but I figured let's just try it out. So I've just got it temporarily wired up here. Just a normal 12-volt coil, a battery, positive to the positive of the coil. The negative of the coil goes through the points, and the body of the distributor goes to ground. So if we plug this in here, so if I turn that, I'm getting a pretty nice spark. So that should work fairly well. I do need to, I can't remember what the story is with the vacuum, not the vacuum advance, the centrifugal advance on these. Is that handed? Does it work differently depending on which way round it rotates? I have put this in the vise, and if you put that in there like that, you can sort of see which way round this, it's pretty hard to do, but you are actually able to twist this to see which way it goes, and I think this one does go the right way because you twist it that way. This always does my head in trying to think about advanced retard and what you're actually trying to do in terms of when the spark happens. I don't think it's really going to matter for this because all I want it to do is run. It doesn't have to run well. It's probably not going to be revved or anything. If I can just get it set to a point where it'll run at a fixed RPM, because they would have run at a fairly fixed RPM for a generator, I imagine, that'll be fine. That's the whole point, just to get it making noise, basically. So I think this will do it. I looked up how much a cap and a new rotor arm is going to cost. So just those is going to cost more than I paid for the whole engine. I think a new cap is about 50 New Zealand dollars, 25 quid. And I think the rotor arms were 20 or 30 New Zealand dollars. So unless someone has some old bits lying around that they don't want, that I can reuse. Like I say, I went through my collection. I try not to hoard parts much, so I don't have a lot of stuff. It's all been moved out to the shed, of course. So I got to test out my idea of having the spare shelf there, and I was able to go in there with a little torch, magnetic torch, so it stuck to the wall, and I was able to sort through. And yeah, the only cap I've got for one of these is smashed in half, which I think it was broken when I got it. So that's a little bit of progress anyway. Like I say, I think what I'll do next is give the engine a clean down. It's quite a nice day. It's getting chilly though. It's definitely becoming more autumn-like. I came in here fairly early this morning and it was less than 10 degrees. So I actually fired up my little diesel heater, which isn't working. It's coming up with a E10 error, which is a generic I couldn't start error. So that's going to need stripping down and looking at. I imagine it might just be gummed up, or the fuel pump or fuel filter is blocked, but I might leave that for another day. But yeah, that's most of the ignition system sorted. I do need to machine that little piece, but that's getting messy again, so I think I might do a cleanup. Like I say, because it's a nice day, it might be worth degreasing and giving that just a clean down because it's covered in muck. And then don't know what else I'll do with it. Let's get that bit done and think of what happens next. Said I wouldn't get distracted with this engine, but I've got distracted with this engine. So I've made up a new sort of coupler for this shaft that sits down in the engine and is driven off a gear down there. The little eccentric drives the fuel pump, and then this comes up and joins onto the distributor. This was what was on the distributor that I got, so I removed the pin and got this out, and this is what was on the engine, inside the engine. This is obviously homemade. It looks like that's been turned down by a bolt, because it looks like the remains of thread just there, and this little eccentric thing has been pinned onto it. It's split a little bit, but hopefully that's fine. Otherwise I'd have to remachine all of this somehow. So I've already partially assembled this. I should have filmed it before I did. I used a piece of high tensile steel bar, and I machined this up so that this end here fits inside there like this one did. This is obviously a part of a bolt because it's galvanized, or a piece of galvanized rod at least. And then this end here is machined and then reamed to be a nice fit, half-inch fit on here. I sort of I dug out my half-inch reamer, and then I set it all up on the mill to be able to drill the cross holes so that everything will line up. Obviously whoever made this didn't have a mill, because the hole that went through it was actually off center. So I ended up drilling this completely through the middle. I center found it and drilled straight through it, and then I had to re-drill this, so there is a little bit of a gap there, but this is quite a tight fit on there. I've used Loctite. This is good Loctite. This won't come off without heat, basically. And then I've pinned it, and I'm just using little roll pins. I did wonder about using a metal pin and then sort of peening the ends over so it can't move, but I think this will be okay. It's a very tight fit in there, and again it's Loctited in place. There's not a huge amount of force on this, so I don't think that's going to go anywhere. And I'll probably do similar at the other end. I've got a little, this is 1/8 roll pin that will go in through there, and I have done a test fit of this, and it does all work, which is quite nice. The only thing I'm not sure about is this had a little sort of thrust washer thing on the end there, so I'm wondering if I need something in between these when I pin these together. It was a very thin washer. It was actually broken as well, broken in half. So I wonder if I do need something in there. I can't remember what the story is with the end float on these, yeah, I can always put, if I have to, I can machine up a little bronze washer or a little thrust washer to go inside there, just to take up that slack. I'm not sure how you're supposed to set that, because there is movement on it. Obviously when this is all in place, you've got the cap, and I guess that puts a little bit of pressure on this. There'll be a tiny little bit of pressure on that, pushing it down. So what I'm guessing is there needs to be just a tiny little bit of clearance on that. But I can temporarily pin this just so I can put it in the engine and we can see it actually turning. got this installed, I just put an 1/8 inch split pin through it for now, and that's enough to hold it and just rotate it as we turn it. And then as I assembled it, I had a sudden horrible realization, which is normally when you've got a distributor, it's on a gear, which means you can rotate the position of it where it's engaging with the engine to make sure you get it into a position where you're able to adjust it to get the timing right. Because it's on a gear, you've got multiple places that you can drop it down to get it into the right position. Because this is like a half dog type drive, it suddenly occurred to me there's only going to be a few positions where the body is in the right place to actually set the timing correctly. And will I have enough adjustment? It turns out I would anyway, because this can rotate 360 degrees. But I've set the engine up, there's a timing mark there. So this is at top dead center for one of the cylinders. It doesn't really matter which one, I think. And we can see that this is just opening, which means I should be in the ballpark for being able to adjust this by rotating the body to get the spark at the right time. But I think you can see there that this should work. There's the pin's opening. I've got the plugs back in, so there's compression. Not a lot, but there is compression. So I think that means, where's that mark on? It's a bit hard to find, but I think that means that's more or less should work. There is a little bit of play on that, which I think is correct, but I think that would work. This isn't tight, so I can just use the adjustable. So, like I say, this you can adjust this any position. So I don't think it matters exactly where it is. I think that should work. I've tried to keep, I did it all on the lathe. I've tried to keep everything as concentric as possible, but who knows. Like I say, the engine doesn't have to do much, it just needs to run, and I think that should be enough to do that. The nameplate on this, I cleaned it up, and I ended up putting a little piece of rubbing some black ink over it so I could actually see what it says. And I don't think this camera can focus on it, but it says it's I can't even see it, DK4A-0, and it says 8 degrees, which will be the mechanical advance on it. So I'm pretty sure that'll work. It'll be interesting to see anyway. With it set up temporarily like this, I could probably actually reset up my temporary coil and see if I get sparking, if I can get a spark to the plugs, to see if the plugs work. That would be interesting. Goodness knows how hard this thing will be to start, because it's only hand cranked. There were pictures of slightly later ones online that seem to have an electric starter. There's a ring gear fitted to this, fitted on that. But, this one's obviously hand cranked, so it must be a very low compression engine to be able to start fairly easily. Haven't actually managed to get anything done on the Riley today, except I have been clearing out some space and starting to move some motorcycle bits over. But I have been looking up this distributor. So a D4KA, the A stands for anti-clockwise. So this is an Austin 7 distributor, but the anti-clockwise is from the engine's point of view. So if you're looking out, it's going anti-clockwise from inside the engine, which is that way, which means when you look down on top, it's going clockwise, which is the opposite of what I've got. So on mine, when this turns, it's not gauged. I took it out to try and see what it was. Now it's not engaged again. Well, I know which direction it goes. It goes anti-clockwise, looking down on top of the rotor. So it's the opposite of what I need. And I think maybe the thing to do here is, well, one, try and get another distributor, because this one would actually be quite useful in my Austin 7 possibly. But the other thing you could do is just nobble the centrifugal advance. If you replace the springs with two pieces of wire, that'll stop the advance working. And like I say, I just need this engine to run, so I would just basically have it fixed, have it set. If you really wanted to get fancy, you could set this up so you could rotate it to change the advance on the fly, but there's no need for that. This will need to be set up for whatever makes it easy to start, I think, and it can just stay in a fixed position. So I might keep an eye out for another distributor. I'll just keep an eye out on Trade Me or something, see if something comes along. Maybe that's, I'm not sure, but it was $5, so if I end up messing around with it, I don't think that's too bad a thing. I did actually do something on the Riley today. I touched up some of the paint on the petrol tank, on the end cap there. So I'm going to leave that now for maybe a week, and then I can sand the runs out of it and touch those up. And I did have a bit of a clean up, and I have started moving some of the bike stuff over. Might do a little bit more of that. I just want to clear some space here. I might leave one table there, just the trestle there, just to give me another bench space, but I'm sick of it being a giant pile of mess in the middle of the room. I went back out to my little part shed and dug out the other dead DK4 distributor I've got. It's the same, it's a DK4A, which means anti-clockwise. This is the mechanism that goes inside there that causes that centrifugal advance. So those two weights spin out, and as they spin out, it rotates this clockwise. So the shaft on this one was a bit beat up, but I think maybe I could maybe modify this one, because it's the dead one, so it doesn't really matter if it's ruined. This is the this is the distributor cap, which is unfortunately pretty smashed up. It's all brittle, so that's not much use. But this, all you really have to do is stop this flinging out. So my idea was just to wrap a piece of very stiff wire around instead of the springs there, and I think that would work. This sort of see how that sits separately, and as these weights spin out, these sort of rotate. So take all of that off. I think you could actually make a little if you put a little piece of steel bar across there with holes drilled in the right places. So if I use something like that, put that, it's not quite thick enough. I think I've got some thicker steel, but a piece of thick steel bar in there just with holes drilled for the pegs, that would lock that in place. That's probably an easy way to do it, and there's nothing in there that can fail easily, nothing to go flying. I may look at doing that. It makes sense to reuse the worst parts if I can, if that makes sense, just to make a running engine. And then that also doesn't ruin any of the parts. If you want to put it back together again later, that's pretty easy to do. Like I say, that's an option if I can't find an opposite rotating distributor. The other thing that would be interesting to see is these have a little, I'm guessing that's an oil scroll. I'm assuming if you spin it backwards, which is effectively what I need to do, that's now going the wrong way. It would be interesting to see if the opposite direction distributors have the scroll the other way around. Again, on this, I don't think that's really going to matter with the amount of use it'll get.